nowadays, it's just they didn't know how to build the market. Best salesperson you could ever hire, is actually you. You're no longer Google.
Yeah,
You're
no
no
kidding,
longer at
right?
Apple, no longer at Meta. Literally every time, $4 trillion market cap company. I am very, very surprised how many very intelligent, engineering teams, founders, just simply haven't walked in their customers' shoes. So there are levels, top of funnel, etc. But I think what you really have to do, though, is you have to look at the buyer's journey. It's the Bible, it's the Bible of marketing.
What's up, everybody? Avetis Antaplyan here. The most common question I get is, what am I doing wrong when it comes to hiring? Let's be honest, one of the biggest mistakes leaders are making, you are making right now, is treating talent like transaction instead of a transformation. Hiring bodies, creating job descriptions, chasing resumes, filling seats. That mindset of it's HR task is killing your momentum and your culture. This moment matters more than ever. The right talent is the difference between you growing 10% a year barely to 10x, between surviving barely in a category of one company and dominance. In this market, talent is not a cost center. It's your competitive advantage. And the companies that understand this, that get this right, are pulling away fast. They're the ones growing 10 times faster than you. So you got to change the game up a little bit. So what needs to change, right? Leaders need to own the talent conversation. The talent acquisition is not something you pass off to some junior person or some HR person. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you have to be involved in the conversation. You've got to be deeply involved in who you bring in, how you develop them, and how to keep them. Retention is key here. Great leaders don't just hire. They build cultures of excellence by being intentional about every person they add to the team. Raise your talent game. You have to. Raise your standards and stop settling for average talent. They're the ones holding you back. They're like anchors on your boat. They're going to either slow you down or stop you. Your future depends on who you bring into this company or who you build it with. I can't wait to have deeper conversations about this. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today, we have a very special guest, Mark Donnigan, a virtual CMO who helps post-Series A companies navigate the challenging path from initial traction to scalable, sustainable growth. He's got deep expertise in video technology, streaming, and category design, practical perspective on building go-to-market strategies that actually resonate with customers. Mark, thank you so much for being here, man.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Avetis. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. Let's jump right in, man. Why do so many tech founders or tech companies hit the wall scaling marketing after finding that early traction, right? Because at this point,
right.
Hopefully they've found product market fit, or maybe they haven't. Like, why is this so prevalent?
Well, in my experience, I think it comes down, everything's contextual, right? So, case by case, there can be reasons. But if you think about it, who's going to found a technology company? It's going to be somebody with a tech background,
Yep.
right?
Tech or product usually.
By definition, right? And who's going to be developing deep tech and really solving the hardest problems? Engineers, product people. And, just sort of stepping back, where have they largely spent their careers? Where do they have experience? In engineering departments, engineering teams, product teams, usually Not marketing, and certainly not sales.
Yeah.
So you have very smart people, identifying real gaps or needs in the market, building technologies that are real. I think we've all seen plenty of cases where company failure really wasn't because the technology didn't work or the product wasn't good, or, occasionally those things do happen. But nowadays, it's just they didn't know how to build the market. Now, in some cases, maybe they built for a need that just wasn't sufficiently large. That happens, and and okay, next time, swing a little bit bigger, or make sure that, you've got a really clear understanding of what the need in the market is. But going back to, in my experience, it's really as simple as that. It's engineers and product folks who, just haven't been exposed. And, if you don't know what you don't know, then no wonder that they launch and then it's crickets, and, they're sitting there going, but at Google, it's like,
Yeah.
well, you're no longer Google.
Yeah, no,
You're
no
no
kidding,
longer at
right?
Apple, no longer at Meta, so
Yeah, you can't take that brand with you. Mark,
yeah.
what are some kind of common signs that the company needs to shift from the founder-led to more structured marketing tactics?
Well, that is actually a great question, because it assumes that that the founder actually does at some point need to hand off. And I'm just, for this discussion, I'll say go to market, which in an early stage, even a growth stage company, go to market is where sales and marketing, are combined together. I mean, they're hand in glove, right? So I actually don't believe that it is way down the road. I mean, way down the road, as in 10, maybe 15 years for some companies, before a founder really can hand off, quote unquote, hand off. They need to own it the whole way.
Oh, wow.
Let's think about Jensen Huang at NVIDIA.
Hmm.
Who's the CRO at NVIDIA?
Still him. Still him.
Yeah,
He's still the brand voice.
Isn't it fascinating when all of a sudden you step back and you go, wait a second. Every time Jensen is in public, he is selling, he's evangelizing, he's positioning, he's doing what great sales leaders do, right?
Wow.
Literally every time. $4 trillion market cap company.
Unbelievable.
And guess what? Jensen Huang. Now, he has an amazing team around him to support, and clearly he's not in the deals,
Sure.
obviously. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think a founder needs to really become a student as early as possible, especially if they come from an engineering background, more technical background of business. And those who do become, and I have some experiences, by the way. I've been privileged to work with a few founders and help them through the years where they didn't know sales and marketing. Were furthest removed from it as you could be, but they became students and actually became quite effective. Even though they always felt like, well, I'm not a salesperson, I would say you are the best salesperson you could ever hire. Is actually you.
Sometimes, because people are taught to delegate and elevate, but there's the right time, it sounds like, to do that. How do you diagnose what's broken kind of in the messaging or tactics? Because that's the key, right? The reason people hate marketing sometimes is because they spend time, money, it feels achy to them because it's not really who they are, and then crickets, like you said, or a little bit of traction, but you're like, man, the amount of time, effort we put behind this for this, it's not worth it. Like, how do you diagnose that there's something broken in the messaging and we can change it?
Yeah, boy, we could do a whole episode on just messaging and how to talk to the market. Now, just to frame the conversation, because when we talk even B2B or technology or enterprise or SaaS or all this, it means very different things, or different profiles, they're different industries. So I'm going to try and be as broad in my answers, but you need to know where I'm coming from,
Sure.
the experience base, because some listeners might be like, well, that's not how it works in my market or my industry. But I really exclusively work with technology founders who are selling B2B, so not B2C. So these aren't consumer technology products. These are technology solutions that are being sold to businesses. They usually involve very considerable investments, which by definition means that there's a lot of integration complexity. In other words, these are absolutely considered sales. And these generally are not, shall we say, kind of RFP sales cycles.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have noticed over the years that the days of responding to RFPs are largely behind us.
Yeah.
In fact, anymore, if an RFP comes in, it's like, well, it can't be real because nobody's actually issuing
Only in the
RFPs.
government space.
Yeah, that's
We're
right.
a
That's right. And
GSA
again,
company, and we got it.
industry specific.
Mark, when you first go into a company to help them out, how do you diagnose what's broken in messaging or tactics? Like, what's the key thing that you're looking for to make sure that they're speaking to the right people?
Yeah. There's two places. The first place I start is really to ensure that the company has a correct understanding of the pain that the customer, their customer, the end customer, is trying to solve. Because it's so easy to get into product features, talk about what something does, but at the end
Mm-hmm.
of the day, we all buy a product, a solution, we deploy technologies to solve problems. And so in a lot of cases, the messaging mismatch, it's not because they don't know how to describe what their product does, although that in some cases that can actually be a real formidable challenge. Is just you have advanced technology, maybe you're doing something that hasn't really been done before, so how do you describe it? But that's not really where the biggest disconnect is. Biggest disconnect is just not knowing what the problem is that the customer wants solved, and then creating messages that will resonate with somebody to raise their hand and say, tell me more.
What are like three things you would do to that's a big challenge.
It's
I'm
huge.
guessing talking to your customers and your potential customers would be a good number one. Like,
Yeah.
what are some things you would do to stop that issue right there?
Yeah. So, number one is it is amazing how many times engineering and even product, believe it or not, is just not out in the field talking to customers. Now, I don't mean that they haven't talked to customers, but they're not listening.
Hmm.
Because we all have a bias, right? And
Yep.
I think that's just a natural human. It's not to say I think any of us we kind of want to hear things in a way that we want to hear them, right? So if I'm developing a product, I'm naturally going to listen to market feedback, and I'm going to hear everything through the lens of my approach or my technology or my solution. It's really difficult to just kind of clear your mind, sit down, and listen really plainly, really simply, and then ask those questions. Because the other that I personally have fallen into is that I think I understand what the customer is saying, but I don't really, because they're not, yeah, perfect. It's not really their job to sit there and lay out this beautifully presented case, for what they need. So they'll sometimes also talk in maybe disjointed ways. But if we haven't asked those clarifying questions, we walk away, we think, yeah, now we really know. And then we go build something, we come back to the market, and the market says, well, no, that's not what we need. It's like,
Yeah.
wait a second, we talked to you 6 months ago or a year ago. And they're
Yeah.
like, well, you must have misunderstood.
Sure.
So the place to start is really to get out in front of the customer. I think another area is to become a user. Now in some industries, some markets, some categories, this is easier than others, right? But to the extent possible, become an actual user of the product in the environment that it's going to be used in. And again, I am very, very surprised how many very intelligent, engineering teams,
Yep.
founders, just simply haven't walked in their customers' shoes. You
That's
know,
huge.
um, they haven't used it. So everything's theoretical. And as we know, theoretical always works until you get into real life.
Absolutely.
You learn real quickly.
That's why, Mark, some of my favorite products, because I advise some startups as well, are the ones that were actually created for internal use and productize afterwards, because it's like, hey, I just built this thing to solve my own problem. I had a legitimate problem in my business and decided to spin it off as its own product.
I mean, I love the Slack example. You know,
Yeah.
Slack was a chat feature as part of an early online game.
Yep.
It came out of a gaming company, and all of a sudden they found that people were actually they were joining the game, but they were joining the game to use the chat function.
Wow.
And out came Slack.
Huge. And
It's
Slack did something very unique because their strategy was great. Because
yeah.
there was two other products. I forgot what they were. They chat products that were created for chat specifically that got eaten up by Slack. So
That's
that's a really
right.
good one. What does it like take to scale marketing beyond Series A? Right, because again, we've gotten the founders gotten it to, let's say, to a point where they found product market fit, they raised their Series A. Now what? Like, cycles get more and more complex and they get longer. How do you do that? How can you make it scalable, the marketing strategy?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, first of all, you have to be really super clear as to how you're going to market and what the role of marketing is in that go to market. So, do you have a sales led motion? Is it a product led motion? The classic PLG. There's of course variations of those two, and then there's others we can talk about. So the reason why that's important is when you're talking about scale, scale could literally mean, if it's a product led motion, scale is, well, I need to go from an average of, X number of downloads, a week, a month, a quarter to X times 10, over some period of time. And what are both the investments and then what do we need to be doing more of to make that number? So that's one measure of scale that falls largely direct, especially in a product-led sales motion, falls directly on marketing. But there's a scale for a sales-led company as well. And that scale can be, we need to be out at more events,
Yep.
we normally do 2 or 3 major shows a year, and now we need to do 6 or 8 because maybe we're expanding geographically, or we just simply need to be more present in the market. And that obviously then requires a different level of scaling of the marketing team, et cetera. So the first thing is the very word scale has to be, what does it mean? What does that mean? Scale gets used a lot in business, but what exactly does it mean? When you're clear on that, then as you're saying, okay, now we need to grow to that 50 million ARR, quickly showing investors and the market that we can get to 100 million, because at 100 million is when it unlocks, potential exit opportunities, et cetera. Depending on the business plan, then the investment of scale in terms of marketing is to say, okay, is it people, is it systems, or is it technology and tools? Um, Really, I would say even just as recent, and chat gpt, again, I'm using chat gpt sort of like as Kleenex,
Mhm.
but the
Mhm.
large language models are only 3 years really in the market, right? But even up until I would say a year and a half ago, still, if you're going to scale, it meant adding headcount. That is really rapidly shifting, so that now it's like, do I actually need to add headcount? Do I need to add better systems? Do I need to add process, or not add, but formalize process that is undergirded with agents and with automation? And so what I am really leaning heavily into myself, for the companies that I support, and as I'm talking to various founders and working with marketing teams, both formally and informally, is leaning very, very heavily towards, rather than just automatically defaulting to we need to add a head count, maybe there's a system or a process or tools, that yes, that can sometimes be much more cost effective. But it's not, it's interesting because the assumption is, well, that's just because everybody wants to save money. That's an element of it always, that
Mhm.
can be attractive, right? But in reality, there's oftentimes more work that can be done that human led process just couldn't do,
Sure.
so again, there can be all kinds of very, very, very neat outreach, customized outreach. There can be content being created while the team is sleeping,
Wow,
you know.
that's huge. A
So
lot of
so getting
automation.
back to the scale question, what's the definition of scale? And then looking at, okay, is that a people challenge? Is it more kind of a process? Is it tools? Oftentimes it can be all three,
True.
but generally you can kind of say, I think we really need to be looking at tools and process, or people and process. And
Well, Mark,
what do you,
how do you look at when you look at volume versus quality when it
yeah.
comes to outbound messages? Like how do you how do you play with that, right? Because sometimes, and also the ICP conversation, how do we just put out more messages to get in front of more
Mm,
people? Do we need to get more custom and do less? Like, what is
yeah.
the right balance of, approaching enough people where it matters, at the same time not using the spray and pray kind of approach?
Wow. Yeah, it's a real dilemma, and I think agents and tools really bring this into focus even more because it's so easy to just push a button.
Mhm.
It's so easy to change a parameter, and now, well, let's send 1,000 messages a day instead of 500, or instead of
Exactly.
100. It's like it's just API calls, right?
Yep.
So this is. I think we have to back up and we have to look at the buyer's journey. And if you map the buyer's journey, and if you have a pretty good understanding of, you know, there in B2B, there just never is a step one, a step two, a step three, a step four. That's why, several years back, I just sort of like tried to eradicate from my language the idea of the marketing funnel. And I'm not suggest, clearly there are levels, or there's gates that a buyer has to go through. Like if a buyer doesn't even know, isn't aware of their problem, well, why would they care about me as a company? So I can do all the amazing branding and brand campaigns in the world, but why would they care? So there are levels, top of funnel, et cetera. But I think what you really have to do, though, is you have to look at the buyer's journey, and then you have to say, what is the mindset of the buyer at each of these? I like to use the word gates, because, whether or not you go through gate three and then the person goes back to gate two, or they kind of follow them sequentially, that it doesn't matter. Buyers are going to do what buyers are going to do. So sellers, we don't have a lot of control over that. But if you look at those gates and you think, okay, what does that buyer need to know, or need to understand, or need to resolve in their mind to continue to the next decision gate? This is why I like the analogies of the gates. So then, if I have a pretty good understanding of what that is, then I can communicate in a way and send messages. And so in some gates, it might be just frequency.
Mhm.
It might be like, hey, look, in this particular gate or stage of the buyer's journey, it's really important that we're present, because buyers are, this is a really critical decision. They need to know that we're not going to go away as a company, that we're committed to the
Sure.
sector, that I'm just pulling that out as an example. That doesn't mean we spam them with messages, but you know what? There may be
To stay in the
some
game.
sort of a campaign that we put together where we're hitting them in different ways with just little pieces of information, case studies, testimonial videos. We're hitting them because that's important. Somewhere else, they may be like, that is totally annoying. Like, I'm not even convinced that you're right for me, and I'm getting all these little 30-second testimonial videos, so that's what, but it goes back to the buyer's journey. And again, if we don't really have the buyer's journey mapped, then we're sort of shooting in the dark, right?
Yeah, we have to understand what they want to deliver the messages to get their attention, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you what mistakes do you see tech companies make when they're crafting their go-to-market strategy?
If we start with hiring and decisions around who you bring into the team, one of the most common, and this isn't just go-to-market, this is probably across the company, is assuming or over-indexing on the fact that this person came from some big company, famous brand, et cetera, and they're going to come in, and because they worked at, fill in the blank. I don't even want to name a company, but they worked at this company or that company, and we revere them, and they held a key position, maybe a very senior position. They're going to come in and crush it for us. Unfortunately, the record is not so good of that happening.
Opposite.
It's quite the opposite. Who crushes it? It's usually the least likely. It's usually the least qualified, at least on paper, but it's the person who's a problem solver. It's a person who's adaptable. Sometimes it's a person who's just willing to grind and not give up.
Figure things out.
Yeah. So, one of the, you asked the question of a mistake. So one of the mistakes is either over-indexing just on fancy title. So regardless of the level of the position, but, they were an SVP, they're going to come, they had 12, 15, 20, 30 marketing people reporting to them. They're going to crush it in our little 50-person company where they're initially going to be a team of one. No, they're going to crash and burn.
Yeah, it's usually the opposite.
It's going to be the opposite, So I actually tend to think that this is one of the biggest mistakes that I see happen. And when I get called by founders and, people say, hey, Mark, like to talk to you, very commonly it's on the heels of either someone that recently left the company or somebody who's still in the company where they feel like, we don't think this person's doing a good job. We need you to come and maybe mentor them, help them, or help us, find a solution. Very often my feedback is the person is fine. In fact, the person is more than qualified. The person is good. It's a wrong fit. They had a whole team at their disposal in their last company. You're asking them to do everything solo, and guess what? They're not equipped to do that.
Yeah.
So you're asking, so your ask is actually unreasonable. That doesn't mean that you keep that person, but it's actually not their fault. It's not their fault from the perspective of, they're not a good marketer.
You're dead on, Mark. You're dead on. Because you got into hiring, so it's right in our world, right? So,
exactly.
We're
I didn't do that on purpose, by the way.
But you pitched it, so we might as well go. We actually advise against it because what ends up happening is they need the shiny looking person to save them, or they need it to look good and go for funding. The problem is just a misalignment, right? Like you said, I worked for Meta and I played a small part of a team of one product of 100, whatever, right? And I had 30 people under me and I didn't do these things. And I had every resource tool and a massive brand behind me.
Yep.
And really a lot of times these executives are just thought leadership. They go out there just to talk. And now you're telling me, wait, I got to build the content. Oh, I got to do SEO. Yeah. Oh, I got to do what?
Yeah.
I got to get on calls. All of a sudden, they're in a different world. They're playing a different sport. Now, they're athletic as hell. The problem is they're just playing the wrong sport. I advise against that. And usually I tell them, guys, you're a startup. You can't afford that person for more than 6 months to a year before that person goes back to that easier job where they made double the money. So be careful.
Correct. And then that's a whole nother problem. Yeah. But you said something key there that I think also is a level of nuance that's really important to pull out, is that It's not even the fact that that person had all these resources at their disposal in
Sure.
their previous big company, fill in the blank, whoever it is. Yes, I mean, that's a factor. In a startup, they're not going to have that. But it's the inertia that is behind that huge brand and in the halo of that company that you just when you're on those buses, in those buses, on those trains, whatever analogy
Yeah.
you want to use, it I am not saying that those employees aren't doing things. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying that there is so much inertia that you can just barely push something and it just woo, it
Yeah.
takes off. And
Absolutely.
when you are in a startup, you are, I mean, for those who are just listening, but those who are watching, it's like you're pushing, and the boulder's not moving, and you're pushing so hard,
You don't have the flywheel
and
effect.
then it just starts to move a little bit, and then and eventually it starts to move,
Yeah.
but that is the world that we're in startups, and it doesn't matter Series A, Series B, even into Series C land, Series D land, the boulders are bigger, they're different, they're, the challenge, but you're still pushing,
Yeah.
so
You have to find the right people and put them in the right seats. I mean, if you're ready to explode and you want someone that's a step ahead to bring in that expertise from a bigger company that just scaled and they were the one responsible, I think it's a great idea because they've seen things you haven't yet. But
yeah,
if you're going 6, 7 steps ahead and you're nowhere near that, forget it. It's going to be a disaster. In fact,
correct.
when people make those hires, Mark, I say, hey, congrats. I was concerned about this, but okay, I'll see you. 6 months later, a year later, how did it work out? Good guy, but I don't know if it's a fit. How did you know? I'm like, I literally told you exactly what was going to happen. You didn't listen, man. Come
Exactly. Yeah.
on.
You've seen the
Oh God,
movie,
I've seen
too
it
many
many times,
times.
too many times, too many times.
Yeah.
Mark, if you were to put something on a billboard, to tech founders, specifically growth state startups, I guess, trying to scale their businesses, what would the one-liner say?
Mm. Um, get into the field, know your customer, know how your customer buys, know how your customer thinks.
Yeah,
You know, get into the field is get into the field.
yeah.
That's
How
easy.
many conversations are worthwhile, Mark? Because sometimes the survey is too small. Like, at what point do you have enough good, deep conversations?
Well,
5, 10?
that's another great, that's a great question because that always is the dilemma, like, well, but I'm running a company, like I
Yeah.
can't just go, hit the road for 6 weeks and how many. I have found that generally speaking, if you go out and you have, 4 to 5 to 6 conversations,
Okay.
maybe 7 or 8, but less than 10.
Okay.
And it now, provided, these aren't, I'm not talking about just random, like just sort of like whoever will talk to you. I
Yeah.
mean, it's in the market you're in, it fits the profile, there's some sort of ICP, you're kind of in the right, you're in the right place.
Yep.
Um, if out of those 4, 5, 6, 7, companies, like 3 or 4 kind of tell you the same thing, well, that's half or slightly more than half. You probably could go talk to another 20 companies and you're gonna
It's
say,
similar.
you know what, the feedback hasn't really changed.
Okay.
You're gonna get, at the more companies you talk to, you'll get more outlier feedback.
Sure.
You'll hear more things, and sometimes that's helpful,
Yeah.
but it's just what I found. And so, I think you want to get as quickly as possible
Great.
to the.
Great.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book?
Oh, wow. I have a lot, but behind me is Play Bigger.
Okay.
Play Bigger is in fact, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple hours ago, and we were talking about some B2B stuff, and I remind him again, have you read Play Bigger? It's and I think I said it's the Bible, like it's the
Nice.
Bible of marketing, like
Play bigger.
yeah, play bigger. And I think whether you're a marketer, whether you're a founder, whether you're a go-to-market executive, if you're an investor, I mean, it's just a timely business book. about success in certainly technology, companies,
Amazing.
startups.
I'm several of those things. So I'm going to pick it up. So play
Yeah,
bigger,
yeah, yeah. You need
play
to read
bigger.
it. You will thank me.
Absolutely, Mark. I thank you now, in fact. Thank you so much for sharing these actionable insights on scaling marketing, aligning strategy with the customer journey. That was the key thing I got out of this, right? Talk to your customers or potential customers. Do whatever it takes.
Yeah,
Guys, to explore more ideas, check out his mini books. I think, Mark, you have mini books, right? How do people get those?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, on my website,
Okay.
just growthstage.marketing, and I'm sure you'll probably put the link in the show
We
notes
will
there.
absolutely
But
do that.
everything's free. It's not gated. It's I get pretty good feedback. They tends to be helpful. So if you're a marketer, you want to kind of learn a bit more. If you're a founder and you're
Nice.
saying I need to kind of learn more about marketing, go check it out.
Beautiful. Mark, thank you so much, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Let's stay in touch. Guys, go check Mark out on LinkedIn and his website so you can get those mini books.
All right.
It's been
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Avetis. It was great talking with you.
You too, Mark. Thanks a lot.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avetis Antaplyan, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.